Hello, dear church. We're already at lesson 5 in the series of Trail of Trials, and I think we've still got a long way to go and lots of stuff to get in the Old Testament that God is teaching us through the ancients. My study on the Trail of Trials has taken me to an unintended place. Things have taken quite a turn. I read from Genesis chapter 1, and then I reached chapter 6, and I saw a very unlikely person go through a trial, God Himself. And I didn't want to skip that, and so I thought, let me just do a lesson on it. I thought it was only humans that go through trials, only humans go through difficult times. God never wrestles with stuff. I mean, He's God. Everything is always perfect in His mind and His heart. But obviously, since God is the one in the trial here, maybe I just need to redefine trials, because as I've said before in the previous lessons, a trial is something that is sent by God or allowed by God to test us. Well, who would test God? Does He put Himself in a trial? And I for this lesson today, I'm not referring to a trial in that sense, because nobody is superior to God. Nobody puts God in a place where he gets tested. So I'm going to use the definition of saying a trial in the traditional way that we understand it is an unintended discomfort from outside of yourself. In other words, you go into a difficult situation and you didn't put yourself there. You didn't plan to be there. You didn't want to be there. So it's suffering that you didn't bring upon yourself. And that, I think, is what happens to God in the text that we're going to deal with today. And the reason why I thought about doing this is because if God went through a trial, through a difficult situation that He didn't put Himself in, I think He would be the best example of what to do when you do go through a trial. And obviously it's difficult to equate because we're human and He's God, but I think there are some lessons in the story that we can really take home. So how did God handle discomfort? And I think this question is particularly pertinent. Sometimes in our trials we wish that we could be God, don't we? We wish that we could just change things, right? That we could command things into existence and they change. Wouldn't we like that to be? We go through difficult times and we can just flick our fingers and everything changes and our trial ends. So it would be interesting to see when God is in a difficult situation, does He just flick His fingers and let things change? Because He can, whereas you and I, we can't do that. And so I've made a sermon statement for this lesson, which is the following: if you could control your trials, where would it lead? If we had the power like God has power to just change our circumstances and change our environments like we want to change it, where would it lead? If we could change everything to suit us, would that create chaos, not cows, in the world, or would it make our lives better? That's something to think about, and I'm not really going to answer that, but I'd like you to keep that in your mind as we progress. The story today is about Noah's flood. It's about the great flood. There are 3 groups of people in this text that are going through a trial. Well, one is not a people, the one is God. Noah is going through a trial. He has to build this boat. He has to preach the message. He has to go on this boat, be seasick, struggle with that, sit with the animals on the ark for a year. That's quite a trial. And then there's the people who live on the land, the people who drown. Their trial is their end. So let me start with the first question. How do I know that God was in discomfort? What made me think that in the text? Well, it's already found in verse 3 of Genesis chapter 6. Listen to the text. It says, "My spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. Well, what was happening here? My spirit will not contend with man forever. Well, the 2 verses before that says, and we've wrestled with this often, and this is my interpretation, understanding of that text, that the children of Seth, remember last week, we closed off and we said, look, Eve had Cain and Abel. Cain killed Abel. Cain then went on his own journey, built his own city, etc. But then later Eve had another son. His name is Seth. And so we see here that the daughters of men were sleeping with the sons of God. They had sexual relationships, etc. They were intermarrying. All right. Now, who were the daughters of men? The daughters of men were the daughters of Cain, and the sons of God. Those were the children of Seth, the sons of Seth. Those who follow God and those who don't follow God. And that is what upset God, because the reproduction of that produced people, the reproduction of those people produced offspring that were ungodly. Those of faith, in other words, were intermarrying with no spiritual conservatism with women. And the result was children that were great warriors that seemed to have no regard for God. And God says here that He will not contend with man forever. What He's saying is that He will not plead with mankind to do what is right forever. He's not going to plead with him, guys, come on, do what is right, do what is good. There will be a cutting off point, right? And so God is saying, you guys are going in the wrong direction, okay? And I won't allow that forever. And that's the same message that we have today. God is allowing a lot of evil today, but He will not let this continue forever. So who placed God in this trial? Well, God is placed here in a trial through people, the human race. Well, the question is, how can people put God in a trial? Well, because God gave them free will. God gave them the power to make their own decisions. He gave us the power to make our own decisions. And that is His creation purpose. Beings with free will. Right? He could have created us to be robots, but He chose specifically to create us with free will, and then He placed Himself in a position where He would risk us hurting Him. That's God's creation order. So the risk He took when He included the possibility of opposition and evil is when He gave us free will. But then let's go further. Genesis chapter 6, verse 5 to 6 tells us that the Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. The Lord was grieved that He made man on the earth, and His heart was filled with pain. Just a few observations that I want to make about this. First of all, the people of the earth were not evil sometimes. They were evil always, the text says. The people did not only behave in wickedness, it's not only in their behaviors, but even in their imaginations. The things that they could think up all the time was even evil. And then in verse 11, chapter 6, verse 11, the text says, now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. So there was nobody on earth that was righteous, right? Everybody was corrupt. There was no hope, and keeping Noah there would be torture for him and his family. And so when I say the whole earth was corrupt, and when the text says that, the text is obviously excluding Noah. Noah was the only guy that God could find. And then the text says that God was grieved. God was grieved. The Hebrew word means, for that word grieve, means repented, regretted, was sorry. Repented, regretted, was sorry. God was sorry for what? That He created mankind? Wow. You see, you might say, but He was God. He knew this was coming. Right? Wouldn't you say that? God knew when He created mankind that they would get so evil that God would eventually want to destroy them, etc. Yes, God did know that. Well, why did He do it? Well, here's the thing. He knew it was coming. But that doesn't mean that He knew what it felt like. So God knows that I will sin, but He doesn't necessarily know what that feels like. He will only know what it feels like when I do it. I don't know if that's true, but that's what it seems like to me. Because God is experiencing pain in His heart like here. And why would He feel this way? Why would He feel pain because of people's evil? It's what they're doing. What has it got to do with Him? Well, because He created people. And the people that He created is getting hurt when other people are evil. Rape, murder, theft, hatred. Those are the type of things that hurt people. So God is hurting because His people He created, they getting hurt, and God is grieving over this. He uses the same word again in verse 7, where He says, I am grieved that I have made mankind. I regret it. The third point I just want to point out is this. God's heart was filled with pain. God had pain in His heart. And that, my friends, that is a divine trial. A divine trial, pain and discomfort. And like I said, you know what caused the pain? People and their evil ways, their behaviors and their thoughts, their imaginations caused God pain. It's interesting that in the English language of Ephesians 4 verse 30, the same word is used for grieve, where Paul says, do not grieve the Holy Spirit. And so even today, through just my thoughts, I can grieve God because it's causing damage to myself and it flows out into actions that hurts other people. So what did God do about his discomfort, this trial? Well, we know the story, don't we? Chapter 6 verse 7 says, "So the Lord said, I will wipe mankind whom I have created from the face of the earth, men and animals and creatures that move along the ground and birds of the air, for I am grieved. I've made them." So if you go to God and you say, "Well, Lord, what did you do in your trial?" He says, "Well, I immediately ended it. I just destroyed the people." Simple as that. Doesn't it look like that? So from a distance, it looks like he acted like a man. If I could end my trial right now, I had the power to do that. Boom, I would do it right now. To end my suffering, God says, I will have to end the human race. Now, can you imagine having the power to end your trial like God does? Somebody gives you trouble. Wipe him off the face of the earth. You can do that. You're God. Your wife annoys you. Boom, you transform her into somebody else. We can have we can have really great fun with this, but let me just point out 3 things that I see God do in his trial that we can, I believe, in some way or another directly apply to our own trials. The first thing is this. The first thing I'd like to say is this. Be patient. That's a no-brainer. Be patient. In Genesis chapter 6 verse 3, God was already in his trial by that time, because in the previous 2 verses he was witnessing what's happening in mankind, and he's already annoyed. When he saw how the children of Seth and Cain behave, he made a decision to set a deadline when he would destroy the human race. Here's the text. "My spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. Now, to be honest with you, to my embarrassment, I never really knew what that meant. I actually thought that means the human race, human beings are going to live up to 120 years. Because before that, you saw Adam and those guys live up to 800 years. And now God was saying, look, I cannot let man live that long on the earth. Human beings have that longevity of life. So I'm going to limit now. From now on, you're only going to get 120 years old. Because after that, you see people sort of don't live that long anymore. That's what I always thought until I had to study it again this week. And then I realized that's not what he's saying there. He says the whole human race. I'm going to give you guys 120 years. And then I'm going to wipe you out. All right? I'm going to give you 120 years, then I'm going to destroy you. That's what we read in 1 Peter 3 verse 20. The text says Jesus went to go preach to the spirits in prison who disobeyed long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. God was waiting patiently in the days of Noah. What does that refer to? It refers to these 120 years, to the best of my understanding. So God didn't just say, all right, I'm going to end my trial now. I can wipe them out like this. He says, I'm going to give these people a chance. 120 years. Now, I don't want to speculate, but it does seem that the people who died in the flood had a 120-year chance to repent and change. God didn't just sit and wait during this period, wait for the trial to end. He identified Noah and sent him to preach to that generation. Now, Genesis doesn't really talk about that, but Peter gives us an indication through the inspiration of the Spirit in 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 5. Listen to what the text says. If God did not spare the ancient world when he brought the flood on its ungodly people, but protected Noah, a preacher of righteousness, and 7 others. So what we see here is that God gave the people of the ancient world plenty of time to change their ways. He gave them 120 years. He placed Noah there. Maybe it took Noah 120 years to build the ark. He gave people plenty of opportunity to listen to God and to change their ways. So God didn't just change his trial. In both James 1 and verse 3 and Romans 5 verse 4, we see that trials produce endurance. It can be translated, that word endurance can be translated as patience or long suffering. God himself suffered for 120 years. He waited patiently. He could have ended the suffering immediately, but he had a plan and there was a process he wanted to follow and give the ancient people another chance. Now, we don't have the power to end our trials, but if we could, we would. Isn't it so? God had the power to end his trial. He could, but he didn't. What does that tell us? Why didn't he end it? Because God knows when the right time is, ladies and gentlemen, and we don't. We don't. If God would allow himself to be in a position where he's patient. Who are we to want to break out of our trials? Who are we to think that we know when the time is best? And so we are left to trust God and believe that He will end the trial at the right time, because God does everything at the perfect time. He's never early, He's never late, He's always on time. So that's the first thing I learned here. Be patient. Be patient. Secondly, look for a Noah. Look for a Noah. You know, you see, trials can often be one of the most lonely places to be. It hurts, it's uncomfortable. Often there is no shoulder to lean on. It seems like the first thing that God did when He saw the way that the human race is operating is to find Noah. Now, what type of a person was Noah? Chapter 6 verse 9 says that he was righteous, blameless, and he walked with God. Chapter 6 verse 20 says that God chose him to take care of the world's animals. What does that tell you about somebody's character? Some people we won't even trust to take care of our cats and dogs. And here God chooses him to take care of all the animals of the world. The world's offspring in terms of animals was placed in the hands of Noah. What type of man is that? Proverbs 12 verse 10 says, a righteous man takes care of his animal. So Noah had a shepherd heart. Chapter 6 verse 22 and chapter 7 verse 5 says that he was totally obedient to God. He did everything just as God commanded him. He didn't like Abraham even did, like sort of question what God is asking him to do, or Moses. No, he just did it. He did something that the world couldn't understand at that time. They've never seen a boat. They've never seen that type of rain. Neither have Noah, but he trusted God. Chapter 7 verse 1 says that God allowed him into the ark because he was found to be righteous in his generation. His whole generation. It was his reward for not becoming like the rest of humanity. Chapter 8 verse 20 says that the first thing that Noah did after his trip in the ark was to build an altar to God. Why? Why did he build an altar to God? He was grateful. I think the ark experience must have been seriously traumatic, don't you? When his feet hit the ground, he was overwhelmed with thankfulness. He praised God regardless of the discomfort and that he had to endure. What type of attitude does he have? Thankfulness in the greatest trial. Chapter 8 verse 21 says that he made God happy. He pleased God. Now, I cannot begin to tell you how important it is to have a Noah in your life. Especially in the difficult times, also in the good times, but especially in the difficult times. A person, a friend, a brother, a sister who's blameless, who's righteous, who walks with God, who pleases God, who's obedient to God, who takes care of his pets, who is thankful to God in difficult situations. That is the type of people we need in our lives, because those are the types of people that will stand by us in our trials. Those are the types of people we want with us in trial. Instead of moaning in your trial or getting frustrated in your trial or trying to fight your way out of it. Why not rather find a Noah that can pray with you, that can give you wise and godly counsel? You see, if you have a Noah, you won't sink in the storm. You can hold on to his boat. Your boat might sink, but not his. We need strong spiritual people in our lives that will encourage us to hang in there when things get tough. And you know what's the great thing about people like Noah? They're always willing to help us. They're always willing to help us. Thirdly, third point. So let's just recap this quickly. Okay. Be patient. Secondly, find a Noah. Look for a Noah. And thirdly, anticipate a rainbow. Anticipate a rainbow. The first thing that Noah did when he got off the ark was to make a sacrifice to God. The first thing God did and say was this when Noah got off the ark. Verse 21 of chapter 8. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, never again will I curse the ground because of man, even though every inclination of his heart is evil from childhood, and never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. In chapter 9, God blesses Noah and his children. He gives them authority to fill the earth with offspring. He gave them authority over every living thing. He gave them authority to eat anything on the planet, not just vegetables. What a blessing. And then God tells them about his covenant with them. And I want to read that to you. That's in Genesis chapter 9, verse 8 to 17. It says, Then God said to Noah and his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be cut off by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth. So God said to Noah, This is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all life on earth. God's trial ends with a rainbow. I don't know what type of emotions you get when you look at a rainbow, but it's amazing. What does God do here? He says, I will never go through this trial again. And here's the sign, rainbow. Boom. The beauty is this, that you must remember this in every trial. God will restore what you lost. He will bless you in abundance for every sacrifice that you made in His name. He will clear up every tear. Your best days are still ahead of you. He will seal off your trial with a rainbow if you endure it and still worship Him at the end. The question is, what are you going to do at the end of this trial? Forget about God or fall on your knees and sacrifice to Him. If you worship straight through till the end, God will make a covenant with you that He will never put you through that trial again. Because when you can get out of a trial and still worship God, be in a trial and still worship God, it means you passed the test. But if you give up in the trial, you're probably going to go through it again. Don't experience a rainbow. Don't expect a rainbow. That can give us hope in the trial and help us hang in there. If we give up, we will fail to see the rainbow. I'd like to make a few concluding observations additionally to what we have looked at so far. First of all, thank God that we are powerless in trials. Thank God that we're powerless in trials. If we could end our trials, there would be chaos, ladies and gentlemen. We even sense a bit of regret in God's words after the flood when He promised to never do it again. Why never do it again? Because it was traumatic for God. Right? If God, who can end a trial, does not do so at the hint of His emotions and still afterwards slightly regret it, then how can we even think we won't regret the end of our trials if we could end it? The best thing to do is to trust God's perfect timing. Secondly, we blame God when we get hurt. Do we blame ourselves when God gets hurt? Luke 17:26-27 says, Just as it was in the days of Noah, so it will also be in the days of the Son of Man. People were eating and drinking, marrying and being given in marriage to the day that Noah entered the ark. And then the flood came and destroyed them all. God is better than us. He could blame us for the pain and let us pay for the pain, but He takes the pain upon Himself. And He saves us. Number 3, prepare for rain if the sun is shining. Genesis 6 verse 14 says, So make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Very simple sentence. I've always had the idea the ark was built for God. God randomly chose a guy and said, you need to build a boat. Why is God going to get in the boat? No, God's not. The boat was never for God. The boat was built for Noah. God gave Noah those specific plans to build because He wanted Noah and his family to survive the flood. It was about them. It was about the animals. If you build the ark according to God's specifications, you will survive the flood. And there's a New Testament parallel to this with the story of the wise man who built his house upon the rock. You build your life upon the foundation of Jesus Christ, you will survive the storm. You build your boat according to the specifications that God gives you, you will survive the second coming of Christ. You will survive it when the storms of this life comes up in your life. And if you're in an easy situation now, life is great, why not focus on making sure that your life is built upon the rock, that your ship is built according to the specifications of God. You see, number 4, your righteousness will protect those you love. Noah's sons came into the ark not because, well, the text doesn't say that they were specifically righteous, but the text does say that Noah was righteous. God saved his children because of his righteousness. If you're concerned about your children, the first place you start, for example, regarding the coronavirus, is not to get them face masks or, I don't know, get more money or get a different medical aid. The best thing to do is to make sure that you're righteous. Your righteousness will protect your kids much more than your own efforts to make sure that they're okay. The next point is this. If God places you in a trial, he is probably protecting you. Genesis 7:16 says the animals going in were male and female of every living thing as God commanded Noah. And then let's do this. Then the Lord shut him in. God closed the door. I find this so beautiful. God closes the door from the outside. And the very purpose for closing the door is to protect those inside the ark from the floodwaters. Now, I've seen that happen the whole time during this lockdown. I cannot even begin to tell you about all the stories about godly people that have been just saved through this lockdown. It's like there's reasons why our country has been locked down, and the Christians are benefiting out of it because God is protecting us. I've got 2 more points. Second to last, if you walk with God, you will rise when others sink. Genesis 7:18 says, the waters rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. See, God placed Noah in the ark because they had a relationship, ladies and gentlemen. He walked with God when nobody else did. That's why he rose above the waters. Right? If you walk with God, you will rise when others sink. Isn't that what the psalmist says? Psalm 91, I think verse 6. Though 1,000 fall by your side, you will stand. You will not. You will not fall. Lastly, God never forgets us in the trial. Genesis 8 verse 1 says, but God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark. And he sent a wind over the earth and the waters receded. In difficult times, it feels like God is absent. But I read a post on Facebook the other day that said the teacher is always silent during the exam. If you feel God is distant or he's not close to you, God hasn't forgotten you. He's moved on a bit. He might be a little bit distant away. God probably didn't visit the ark every day. He's letting you go through this trial alone. And at the right time, he's going to recede the waters and the trial will end. I pray that the story in Genesis chapter 6-8 has been a blessing to you, 6-9. And I challenge you to go read the story and go grapple with it a bit. I think there are some valuable things in there. Love you guys. Have a super rest of the week.